scientist for the evening, Bryan Miller. Come on out.
Woo!
Bryan Miller.
Come on down.
Yeah. All right, Bryan has a pretty lengthy bio well, first of all, he's the principal of Diablo Advocacy. And what would you tell us about Diablo?
Diablo is an issue advocacy firm. We work on progressive issues across the country, clean tech. A lot of it's obviously based here in San Francisco, but work with clients across the country on a whole range of technologies in the clean energy space.
Yes, very important. Would we agree? Yeah. Yes.
I don't know what any of those words mean, but that's very sexy.
Sounds like the sounds like the work of the devil.
That's right.
It's just a blind date we set up, by the way. Very elaborate blind date.
That sounds blasphemy. All right.
So
It's a very thorough Tinder profile.
So the bio is extensive. Definitely been featured in a lot of incredible places, done a lot of great work, including achieving a 98% win rate in regulatory verdicts against the largest fossil fuel companies in America across 47 states.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Do you just keep their like skulls on a wall or something?
No,
Essentially, yeah. You just
some people hang deer that they hunt, and we
You just
hang
hang them-
politicians
yeah,
at
exactly.
Diablo, yeah.
antlers of a CEO. Okay.
The fossil fuel industry has Bryan's face all over their walls. Like, this guy put a hit on him.
Public enemy number one.
Oh my God.
And in 2009, he was appointed by Obama to serve as senior counsel at the U.S. Department of Energy. So this is going to be great.
Fancy.
I just got a boner. I need to readjust. Oh, fuck. What the hell?
Randy.
I hope
Good seat.
people are going to think I'm gay. Huh?
No, I don't think so. Don't worry. Your secret's safe with me.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
You're welcome.
So,
Okay.
so Bryan, have you ever been on stage with comedians before?
I did this show with Cecily Strong from Saturday Night Live. I don't know if that counts, but we were filmed, so I don't know if that's stage. But no one, obviously, no one with your stature.
Did he just say he was on SNL?
He said that he was filmed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Humble brag.
Nice.
What's your-
Hashtag blessed.
What's your PornMD account? Okay.
Do you want to finish his bio before you undress him in your
We'll
mind?
stop. I'm sorry.
Just curious.
Sorry.
I just see Justin's pants getting higher and higher.
I need to stop. This is my cell phone.
Rising sea level.
My cell phone's
Sea
getting
levels.
erect.
I don't know
Okay.
how far we can go with this metaphor.
So
Homo erectus.
just a quick question before we start is, with all of this work that it's tough to push legislation through the government out of all places to try and push clean, sustainable energy. Is this better left to the private industry or maybe nonprofits like Tesla and Solar City, that kind of stuff?
Well, I think that's a really important question. I think everybody has a role. Nonprofits certainly have a role in this. My experience from sort of working on all sides, I've worked in government, I've worked in nonprofits, worked with the private sector. The private sector is just more nimble when it comes to these things. So I do think there's a role for the Sierra Clubs and the Earth Justices and the folks that you read about in the paper. But the reality is when companies, particularly Bay Area companies, have their existence at stake in a particular piece of legislation, they're just going to be able to be more nimble. And so I do think that, to me, that's the richest place to work in these things, is when you can sort of drop everything you're doing and work on things that you just have to win, where failure is not an option.
Yeah, that's going to be really important moving forward in the future, is for us to work together to be focused on alternative energy. And just last follow-up is, do you believe in the potential of nuclear energy?
No, is the short answer. But let me
elaborate,
if I could. Thanks. We're in an important place for that question. When you think about California, we used to have about 25 nuclear power plants in the state. We're down to one. It's built on the San Andreas Fault.
Thank God.
It's run by Homer Simpson?
Yes, I mean, it's not figuratively built on the San Andreas Fault. It's literally built on the San Andreas Fault. And
What could possibly go wrong?
Oh my
yeah,
God.
what could conceivably go wrong with that idea?
Another movie with The Rock, maybe. Super awesome.
Oh my God, San
And
Andreas.
before you keep going, maybe let's preface that question by saying, what if it was optimized in terms of safety? It was the absolute safest it could possibly be, and we figured out, just like the sun is a nuclear fusion, constantly fusing and making energy, what if we could replicate that same thing on Earth with ultimate safety? Would that be better than solar, better than wind, better than all other
Well, I think that's the illusion that the nuclear industry always pushes. They imagine this world where you could get to 100% safety, and there's no such thing. Let's just quickly look at our history in this country. We've had one nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island, and it was barely an accident. The thing basically just burped, and we have never built a new nuclear power plant again in the history of this country, and that was in the mid-'70s. So when you think about the risk, even that 1% risk is so existential. Like what does that risk mean? It doesn't mean, oh, okay, well, like a solar panel fuses out and somebody comes and replaces it. It means a city blows up. It means Fukushima. And so you never get to the point where that risk is worth taking. And I've struggled with that when I worked at the Department of Energy in the Obama administration. One of the things I didn't appreciate until I got there was that the Department of Energy actually owns every nuclear weapon in the country, and they rent them out to the Pentagon, whatever renting a nuclear weapon means.
They just sign a form? Like
yeah,
I
it's
have
like a
4
lease.
of them I need for Monday.
Bring it back when you're done. It's a strange situation. And so I worked with a lot of good people who'd spent their lives trying to do exactly what you just said, was make it perfectly safe, and there's no such thing.
That's like saying, okay, we're going to wear 2 condoms, but they both have holes in them.
Yeah. That's why I don't.
shot.
That's why I don't use any condoms. Period.
Good for you.
For that reason alone. Like for obvious purposes.
In case a Fukushima happens in bed.
Case of Fukushima.
Okay, gotcha. We
These
can't
are
go
the
back
gays
to
of
that bed.
Case of Fukushima.
Have you seen those 2-headed raccoons in my bed? That's awful.
That's I have a 2-headed dildo.
Yeah. Okay,
Can I
I bought
call
it off
raccoon?
Amazon, but hey, you get it. Okay.
All right, and let's roll right in. Great, this is great. Let's roll
Yes.
right into our questions.
Bryan, calm down. You look really nervous. Shut up. Oh my God, you guys, stop making him nervous.
All right, Bryan,
All right.
do you want to read our questions?
See if you survive the night.
Sure. So let me just give one for these questions. What we're going to try to do is let these hilarious people entertain you all night. But our goal is when you come out after an hour, you're going to have the abbreviated history of everything that's important that's ever happened in environmental climate change advocacy in a sort of 1 hour wrapped up. You can brag about it at cocktail parties if you want. And we're going to cover just sort of the key moments, at least in my mind. I could be totally wrong that these are the key moments, but these are the ones that stand out to me.
So this isn't going to be measuring CO2 levels in ice over the last 10,000 years.
CO2 levels in ice.
Baby.
All right. Did you want to read the question, Bryan?
Sure. So, the first question, what I want to talk about is I think there's this myth out there that has kind of pervaded recent journalism that things used to be better in climate and environmentalism, that it used to be a bipartisan issue. I hear that a ton from reporters for some reason, and a lot of people, I think, gravitate towards that storyline because it just makes everything now sound worse, and obviously things are worse now, but on the environment and clean tech, I'm just not sure that things have ever actually been cooperative. And so, yeah, the question is can you name one of the 2 presidents who vetoed the Clean Water Act, which is one of the most basic things we rely on to just drink what's in our glass right now?
George Washington, number 1. Clearly, he doesn't like clean water. Have you seen his teeth? Wooden. Yeah, can't handle. And
This is a question for the audience, yes?
Yeah, yes, but comedians, do you have thoughts first?
Oh God, I don't know. What does veto mean?
Veto, you
Like Uncle Vito.
Uncle Veto, like you Uncle Veto.
You
him?
dip the chip in the veto.
Which
Is that-
president had the Uncle Veto?
I don't fucking know.
Oh, so is that like a? Okay, I don't know.
And bipartition? Partition by Beyonce, bitch. That's what it is. Okay.
It
These
was
word
Jay-Z.
associations are very
Jay-Z.
meaningful.
I know. Okay. Anyway,
Okay.
so.
Florentina?
All right.
Thoughts,
All right.
Florentina?
Do we have any?
No, I'm stuck.
All right, let's see what the audience says.
All right, hold on.
Carter?
Oh.
Incorrect, but an interesting
Are we
guess.
close?
Thank you for raising your hand.
Are we close to the right time period?
Yeah, you're in the genre, yeah.
Was it Nixon?
Nixon.
Nixon is one correct answer.
Oh, she's 2. Wait, let's see if she can get the other one. Let's
right.
let's give her
Sorry,
a chance
we
to
were
get
looking
both.
for an answer in the
Alright.
form
Since
of
there
a.
were 2.
We
Take
were
a
looking
stab
for
at
an
the-
answer in the form
Yes.
of a question.
I feel like it's one of the Bushes.
That's usually a good default answer, but it's
Trump.
It's not.
Oh, if it was in that
Which Bush
era,
is
then
it?
it wasn't Carter.
Yeah, no, you know what?
When
The-
did water start getting dirty?
Oh shit.
Eisenhower?
Eisenhower? She's got
Oh,
Correct answer.
Eureka.
I know that
Shut up.
Yes. Come on down.
Come on down.
Come on
Gonna get a
down.
prize.
girl. Do 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 do.
Ladies
and
and
gentlemen,
gentlemen, give it up
Alright.
for your winners
We have a
tonight.
picture of the two of
Come
them.
down. So
What's
we
your name,
have
sweetheart? You are
Jazzy.
Jazzy and
Oh, I gotcha.
Jazzy
Rachel.
and Rachel.
All
turn
right,
around.
right. Face the audience, guys.
the audience.
I'm going to give you guys one little globe.
You
and then
are the
because it was
world.
Nixon, we got this amazing book. Can you just read the title for me?
Okay, Tricky Dick Nixon and the Heat Death of the Universe.
And then can you read the summary on the back for me?
Okay, my reading can stand it. The governing intelligences were desperate. Now that the very black holes had evaporated like so many dust-choked watering holes, where they could turn for the survival drive that they need in the dying universe, the answer was clear. To the greatest survivor in a trillion years of infinitely variegated life, the human man named Richard Mulhouse Nixon.
This is called self-publishing in action.
Yeah.
You just got a short book about Richard Nixon and doing something with the galaxy. Enjoy the read. Enjoy, guys. Thank you.
Congratulations.
That's Amazon self-publishing.
It
right
is
there.
Amazon
Exactly.
self-publishing.
How did you guys know that answer? Fuck.
Yeah.
So anyway,
You Googled it, did you?
This is a hilarious picture that Kevin found. Nixon was Eisenhower's
amazing.
vice president for a time, so I guess they used to go to baseball games together. and
Eating
things
that,
like that.
eating that dog.
Swallow that
Yeah.
dog,
Eating
honey.
that
Swallowing that
Yes.
Right.
Open.
But anyway, I'm glad you got the Eisenhower one because this point I'm trying to make is this goes back a pretty far way, right? Like Eisenhower, you should feel pretty old if you're thinking Eisenhower stuff, and he actually vetoed the Clean Out. Yeah, and he vetoed the Clean Water Act. Nixon actually vetoed it twice.
Just to
and,
prove a
and we're
point?
we're gonna not once wasn't enough, and
So
we're
they
gonna
didn't want clean water.
evidently not. Yeah.
Wait, teach us about the Clean Water Act. When did that start?
Yeah, and like how to use that in an enema. For my
So then I think the next slide is actually a great way to talk about the origins of the Clean Water Act.
Woo.
All right, jumping right into the next question then. And we'll
Okay,
talk-
so the question is, where was the first major U.S. oil spill, the worst in American history at the time, which helped prompt many of the modern environmental laws, particularly the Clean Water Act?
comedians. Do you
I
have
saw-
thoughts?
I saw his
Yeah,
hand.
Oil
We'll
spill.
jump up there in a second.
Was it at like an Exxon pump?
Can you give us a hint?
It was
no,
like
don't give me a hint.
what was the big hair jail facility of the time? I think that would
Probably where
probably.
it came
U.S.
from.
oil. I mean, what kind of oil was it? Like, you
Yeah.
don't specify. Is it crude oil? Is it facial oil?
Is it Acme oil?
Is it Acme
Facial oil, yeah.
Is
We
it
get that most
like-
from Saudi
like,
Arabia,
what kind of
the
oil are we
facial
talking
oil.
about? Because there's a
Well,
lot of stuff.
conditioner wasn't really a thing till.
No. Like the
Later.
1900s.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll ever see two presidents attending a baseball game again, ever.
First major oil spill.
Yeah.
I will give
no
you
idea.
one background hint. I should have said on all these questions, most of them, if you're in trouble with the question, have a California relationship in one form or another. So just throw that out.
Okay.
Pacifica. No.
Yeah.
All right. We saw a hand up here.
All right.
first.
What do we
Save the
got?
whale.
It was that one off Santa Barbara.
That's it.
Oh.
Correct
Oh,
Yeah.
Eureka!
Come on down.
Come on
sir.
down, sir.
You sexy bald-headed man, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for him.
Come on down.
You better.
Now we
work.
know that. Basically, just 1 sec. I'll give it to you.
I don't know if it's blue, but that's what I'm going to use it.
Okay, I'll show you in a
Yes.
sec. Most oil spills are
And-
awful
and
when they're in the
I'll
water.
apply.
Oil shouldn't be in the water, but this is Central Lavender Kiss Me Massage Oil. It's edible. You could spill this over your whole body, my friend.
Justin can help you spill
And
it.
no one will
I'm gonna
bother
drink
with
it.
it.
Oh my God, he totally did.
Oh
Is
no!
it good? Does it
Don't.
taste
I wouldn't.
No! Don't do it.
Don't.
Don't.
Don't. Here, let me.
Chug it. I
Justin's
feel like
good with
we've
his
just.
mouth.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
God.
Ah!
How did that taste?
Justin,
You're
he's
going to be
ready
shitting
for
your
you.
pants in 2
I've got a pretty slick voice.
Oh my God.
Oh, no pun intended. All right.
You just downed the lube. Give it up for this guy.
I felt we just hazed him. He's in the frat now.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Congratulations.
I love how fearless he is.
I know.
Is
You
that
could
the
ba-
word we're gonna use? Okay.
I would love to
Honey,
see.
You're
I-
so brave.
I do buckets of that shit on Tuesdays.
I would,
Okay. That's enough.
I would love to. if you see him in the bedroom, with his partners, like, I got this edible oil, they just starts chugging it. Like,
Yeah.
what is going on here? This is what you're supposed to do.
Hang
Now
out
put
with
the
us on a
condom on my
Saturday.
nose.
I will get you a
Put
shot
it
of-
on my nose. Blah, blah, blah. Okay.
I can get you a shot of Hennessy. That probably tastes better than that.
Get back to us on that.
Pure
So,
protein.
were you in Santa Barbara? Okay, let's go. Okay,
All right.
Santa Barbara it is.
How many people, just maybe like a quick shot, have actually heard of the Santa Barbara oil spill? Just a quick shot? Okay. About half the room. I think it's a lost fact in
Yeah.
history, which is the reason I bring it up.
I never heard of it.
I actually don't think I'd heard of it until I was in the administration one day, like researching laws after BP had blown up in the Gulf. And I just think it was like a really important event. And if you're down there the next time, just take a look off the coast and you still see the rigs. They're still there.
The rigs are still there.
What year was? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
One second.
What did the Exxon Valdez fiasco contribute to environmental laws? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. Almost nothing is the short answer. And
Okay.
there was a sort of a minor, essentially a bill that regulated tankers, but didn't really add anything like structural to the fabric of what we think of as the regulations. And what surprised me the most is when BP happened, when the Gulf oil spill happened. My boss, the Secretary of Energy at the time, was tasked with leading the efforts on this. And you might remember Stephen Chu being on TV all day talking about these things. And we thought we had a golden chance to pass a big bill in Congress, because we thought, well, if there's ever going to be an awakening of what is wrong with what's going on with energy policy, this is it. And I researched a lot about the Santa Barbara oil spill. I researched a lot about Exxon Valdez, and we certainly talked to members of Congress who just basically said, hey, this news will pass. Everything passes, and we don't plan to do anything on this. But I thought it was a missed opportunity. And I think what Santa Barbara, the main reason I put this question in there is, I think what it stands for is really back to this question of bipartisanship. Nixon vetoed the Clean Water Act twice, even after the Santa Barbara oil spill. This is a guy who'd been governor of California, like the very state. I think in the next slide we show a picture of him having to come and visit
Oh, he was
the
coming.
state.
He had to come.
He came. He's like, oil.
He came oil.
And he was under pressure, but still thought he could get away with, and did get away with, vetoing the response to a natural disaster, even in his own home state. And so I just don't think we've ever really agreed.
He
on this.
vetoed it because he just loves to lather himself in oil. Why was he vetoed?
It's the same conservative bullshit you hear. You could repeat the talking points from the 1970s to today. And I looked at his veto message when we were preparing these slides, and he just said, I think this is an issue better left to state government, blah, blah, blah. Not that I don't think it's important. It is, but federal government has no role. And
And now Exxon
Congress-
is in the White House.
Exactly.
So, and this is
Right.
this is really important because
Is that true?
It
or
was
not?
it was Teddy Roosevelt that 70 years ago said he had a goal of clean air, clean water, and open spaces for the future generations of America. And then you have Eisenhower that vetoes this. You have Nixon that vetoes this. And Kennedy was between, right? And he was trying to also push for it, right?
Yeah, what happened with that?
How, in terms of history, like you're trying to explain here, has it been this bad? Is it worse back then than it is now?
Well, I'm generally a believer that things were not better back then, and in anything in politics. But by the way, and the best just example I can give to you for everyone who's aware of Hamilton now, because of the musical, let's just remember Hamilton died in a duel with the sitting vice president. Okay, so politics was tough back
Can we
then.
bring
you
that
won
back?
Meeting,
You know,
man. We didn't
yeah,
see it.
I've never seen it live.
Yeah,
We're waiting for the tickets to go down, man. He died at the end.
That's some bullshit,
Are
Brian.
you kidding, Brian? We haven't seen it yet.
Sorry, I didn't mean to ruin the ending. But Hamilton dies in a duel with Aaron Burr, and it's like one of the most amazing historic facts, and yet people say, oh, we all used to get along better at some mythical time in American politics.
I
And I'm
thought it
like,
was a
really?
rap
I don't
battle.
I probably would vote for bringing back duels to Congress. I'd be like, yeah, give all of them a gun, lock the door, and we'll figure it out at the end. No one's with me? Okay.
And so
Throw away the key.
What was the purpose of the Clean Water Act? What were we trying to pass it for? Yeah.
The Clean Water Act, just to be clear how it ultimately did pass, Nixon vetoes it twice, heavily Democratic majorities eventually get the votes and overrule them, and it leads to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the foundation for pretty much everything we rely on today to just drink the water that comes out of the faucet. And it was something that every other industrialized country had a version of before we had to have this huge tanker spill and a president get away with vetoing it twice. We're going to talk about the responsibility that the Democrats own. I don't want to make this sound partisan. In fact, our theme is kind of just the opposite, that everybody has blood on their hands here. But
no, that's okay.
Quick question. Did any of the protesters have sign that said "Don't pass gas"? I feel like it's a missed opportunity.
That would be a good one.
that would
Don't
seem
pass
like
gas.
a natural.
Don't pass gas. Pop, pop, don't. Pass.
And then someone's like, "Oh, natural."
So, and just to be clear, is it because of even today we see a lot of conservative values be, hey, don't ruin small, medium-sized business growth potential with EPA, with slapping stuff on. Don't allow me to not do this because I want to make money and bring something into the world. And
Like Trump's budget came out today, and it got EPA, got DOE, got Interior by tens of billions of dollars, and basically the
National
message
Institute
is,
of Health,
yeah, these are job-killing regulations, and I'm loosening up the regulations on American business, and that's just never been borne out by history in any way, shape, or form. California has the 6th largest economy in the world, and we have by far the most progressive environmental regulations of any state in the country.
woo!
But
We're here.
wouldn't
We're queer.
reducing, just take devil's advocate. Wouldn't the reducing, cutting the EPA and whatnot, the regulations allow for like a nice, small mom and pop like oil cleaning company to just, really, take it up. Like
they-
a two-person
Small mom and pop.
operation. They could certainly handle that.
It's
Let the
creating
private
jobs.
sector do what they need to do.
Or they could
A bucket of them.
replace the energy department. What is it called? Yeah.
Yeah.
They
We'll
could
just say
just
energy
replace
Did you
it.
vote?
Yeah.
No,
That's
they
the
could
last
just
time I voted
replace
for
it with
Trump.
like Red Bulls or something, I thought. Still
That-
natural energy.
It looks like a crab is going to attack the Santa Cruz Islands. That's what I see there. I clearly see that. It's the
Yeah,
Rorschach
was that
test.
the actual? Was that made to scale to see how?
That
distribution-
is a actual, in theory,
Interesting.
that's scale, right? It's
How long
amazing.
did it take to clean
Like
that
a
up?
Rorschach.
Years, and hundreds of thousands of species died, and the place has never been the same since. Some waves actually change patterns, and there's a lot of fascinating history. If people want to read more, let me know afterwards.
So, okay. Well, I just see a crab, but I get it. It's bad. It's bad.
I guess the silver lining here is that it happened at Santa Barbara.
They're the
But
worst.
I'm just kidding. If anybody's from Santa Barbara, I'm just kidding. I've been there once and I got rejected by this one guy. So fuck Santa Barbara.
But yeah, this and then Exxon Valdez was Alaska.
Yeah,
And
Exxon
then-
Valdez in the
and that
Gulf.
was larger than the Gulf spill, the BP
No, the Gulf's the largest
The bi-
spill
okay.
in U.S. waters.
in U.S. waters. And what was Exxon? This is 3 million. What was the Exxon was?
Yeah, it was somewhere in between. I don't have the number in my head, but right, Exxon was the next largest, and then the Gulf dwarfed them all.
Was
And
that-
since we're talking, okay.
what years were they again?
Exxon was mid-'80s. This was 1972. 69, sorry. Yeah, and then BP was
69, dude.
2009.
pointer.
Thank you.
69.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say
And
69.
2009
It says
is most recent.
69.
Okay.
In the spill.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering if the Exxon spill or the spill that was happening in the Gulf, is that still constantly actually being spilled right now today?
The Exxon spill?
Yes.
Oh, you mean the Gulf
In
spill?
the Gulf, yeah.
I mean, the Gulf's been capped in
Yeah.
theory. I've never been down there in a sub to see this thing, but
You need to
apparently
go.
it's always gonna
Really?
Is
Wait,
it a
that
must-have?
thing in the
leak a
water?
little bit.
You
yeah.
just need to answer that question by going.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was wondering if it has been capped, they say, but I,
I mean,
think
it's
it's
been
still.
capped. My understanding is that doesn't mean it ever totally stops. And by the way, there's a natural oil slicking effect. If you go out and take a boat tour in Santa Barbara, you will see just some oil that's naturally
Really?
rising and sitting on the surface. And some of that just happens in life. So there's a bit of this that you're always going to see, but the Gulf thing, yeah, theoretically, I mean, it's been concreted, and they've put all this stuff on top of it, and it's still going to drip out for the rest of our time.
Yeah, there's some arguments that they're under the surface of the rock beds under the oceans. There is leaking oil into our oceans.
Close your
down
pores,
below.
ocean.
Yeah, it feels like acne. Just with oil.
That's still not an excuse to spill millions on the
Exfoliate.
so
Yeah.
right in yeah.
We just need to build a huge tampon, like the one
Yeah.
Florentina was using before she got out here.
It's true.
Man.
I can save the
Plug
world.
that shit
all right.
and like, absorb all that oil. Anyway.
That's a big tampon.
I
All right,
know.
let's get on to the next
That'd
question.
get vetoed.
Maybe if we get a woman president,
Okay,
she
well-
could use her
Yes,
tampon
exactly.
powers.
Okay, so
Tamponade that
just
shit.
quick definition, cap and trade is essentially one of many policy solutions out there that sets a cap on some level of emissions of something and then gives credits for how many people can actually pollute or do this thing that you're trying to regulate, whether it's CO2 or acid rain or whatever it is. You give out these credits and then you let industry trade them back and forth, and you consistently lower the cap. And the idea is you create like a market mechanism where industry will come along and innovate, so they're not paying more and more for these credits. It's a wonky solution. It has something that's actually had a big impact in this country. And so
wonky.
the question is
Wonky.
which president signed the first national cap and trade legislation?
Okay, this isn't a bad one because it's multiple choice.
Yeah.
Um,
Also,
Let's
was
have the
acid
audience.
rain
Yeah.
before or after Purple Rain?
I think that's the B-side, but I'm glad you know.
I'm gonna go with Hoover.
Bish.
Hoover. Yeah,
'Cause that's the middle school I attended.
that's good to know.
But anyway, who would like to answer this
Yeah.
question? Anybody in the audience
Hoover.
tonight?
All right, let's go. Audience?
Which president
One in
signed the
4
first national
chance.
cap and trade legislation?
All right.
There it is.
It can't be all of the above?
No, probably
I'll
not.
try Mr. Bill Clinton.
That is incorrect.
Not Bill Clinton.
Process of
Ooh.
elimination. There's only George W. Bush, George W. H. Bush, or Barack Obama.
Is this a bad thing?
Obama?
Wait.
Obama.
Is the cap and trade thing a bad
Cap and trade's good. Cap and trade is we're going to talk about
Okay, I
in
hope
this
it's-
particular
It's
case.
Barack Obama
where-
because
where
it's a
it
good
was
thing.
used.
I hope it's a.
Okay.
Barack Obama is incorrect.
Incorrect.
Oh, fuck
Thanks,
that.
Obama.
You guys just have an aversion to say the word Bush, don't you?
Say it. Let it roll off the
All
tongue.
right, I'm gonna go with the less dumb Bush, so the older one.
Ha.
George Herbert Walker Bush is your
Yeah.
choice. She is correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Come
on down.
Eureka, come on down,
Come on down.
sweetheart.
Well, we care about
Trim down
about
Bush.
carbon cap and trade. We care about reducing your own carbon footprint. So here's a little book that'll help guide you to reduce your own carbon footprint. Now, is your carbon footprint big? Do you know?
She looks like
I
a size
don't drive.
7.
You don't drive? Okay, that's good. You walk everywhere. Great. Do you consume a lot?
I don't think
Are you asking her if she eats a lot?
Yeah, what the fuck?
I
Hell,
don't-
man.
Fucking
I wasn't
asshole.
trying to
Ask a
knock.
woman how much she eats?
Why don't you just ask
What's
her, are
in
you
your
fat?
refrigerator?
Yeah, how old are you? How much money do you make?
Well, I'm being picked on. Thank you very much. Have a joy. I just meant
Feminism.
consumption. Like
Oh,
there's
yeah.
different ways.
Feminist.
I didn't just mean food. I didn't mean food. I meant
Kevin,
all
we
types
love
of
you.
consumption.
How much
Okay,
do you
okay.
consume? As
Where
in,
with
like,
her?
What does consume mean
Wait.
to you?
Electricity, anything you consume.
Electricity, Netflix.
Yeah.
How much Netflix?
Okay, like how
All
much
right,
do you
is your
consume?
Netflix? Okay.
Okay, so George Herbert Walker Bush signed the first national cap and
Jesus
trade
Christ.
legislation. It was
He
Oh.
left the
Wow.
price tag on?
that's a
What?
weird lining. That's very.
Is he
pathetic.
actually exposing himself? Did we crop this photo
Unclear.
for a
Can
reason?
someone please make a music video out of this?
It's got to be at
Called
a
Please.
Acid
Republican
Rain.
National Convention.
I
picture,
feel
right?
he just said, "Come at me, bro." Come at me.
I feel like he was in Lana Del Rey's American Anthem something song. I don't know why, but this is before Lana Del Rey's time. Okay, yeah. You
You
swallow
got-
that whole
you
thing.
swallow
No,
Shut
that.
don't
up.
drink out of that
We
oil.
know how kinky you can be.
Oh my God. It's
very
What was
clear.
in that fucking lube? It's getting you all intoxicated. Crazy.
So what I think is important about the acid rain history in this country is acid rain was a problem. I'm not going to dwell on exactly the science of it, even though I know this is a science show, but we could get lost here for a while. But acid
Show us
rain.
Just
Is,
explain
pictures.
a
Just
little bit.
In pictures.
yeah, I mean acid rain is actually one of the few terms in climate that means exactly what it says. It was high acid rain that could do things like corrode cars and corrode roofs and hurt the human skin.
I remember
Because
that
of high
Simpsons episode.
concentrations
remember?
of CO2 in the atmosphere that enter into the water cycle.
Of several different chemicals that
Chemicals.
literally like raise
Wait,
the
is
acidity.
it because of the oil spill and then precipitation and then it rained down gas? No.
This is where I feel like we could go into a
Trying to use my
black
my
hole
science
for a
for-
long
Yes.
time. It was from a lot of factors that actually were what we call criteria pollutants, which are things that industry can pretty regularly control. You have to make a choice whether you're going to use certain things in a particular concoction or certain other things. And look, this was such a problem that we were literally having acid fall from the sky. That's what it took to pass a bipartisan solution. And Bush actually asked for it when he was campaigning. And he got the bill pretty quick from a Democratic Congress and signed it, and it gave it to the EPA, and it worked. It worked actually remarkably well, and we lowered acid rain levels by about 40%, which is way faster than the projections were.
Can you like
And it's
go
not a
under
problem
acid rain and like open your mouth and then get high off it and like, get an
Yeah.
acid?
I've never
Were they
tried that, but
tripping
that would
balls?
make
Type of
sense.
acid
Yeah, that's the
rain.
same
Were
shit,
they
right?
tripping balls?
Can you?
Tripping ball,
Like
hail.
I've done acid before, so
Yeah.
like I should have.
San Francisco.
Look at how high he is. Obviously, acid rain
Yeah.
worked on him.
He probably just misunderstood
he
the
looks
term.
like Bill Clinton
probably.
playing with balloons. Okay.
He probably thought it was like the war on drugs. We can't.
2 points on this.
We get 2 points.
Is the first point is cap and trade still in existence?
For acid rain, it is. And the point I would just try to get people to take from this is we spend a lot of time on the left debating what policy solutions are. I've come up with the better mousetrap to solve this particular problem, and we actually know what the solutions are. And there's plenty of good solutions. None of them have to be perfect. This has been tried for decades. It's worked incredibly well. We could do carbon taxes. We can do other things. But we exert so much energy on the left, like trying to prove the better way of doing things. And actually, the issue is
That's a
like more
good
how we
pun on
actually pass the
energy.
things that we know are out there already.
Mousetrap. I remember that game by Milton Bradley.
All right, let's take.
Oh yeah, well,
So it's a miracle that actually, I think this actually passed. Now, what was the difference between this issue and other issues? Like, did the acid have to fall on the heads of the politicians?
Right.
Literally. I mean, that's a super important question. Literally, we had acid falling from the sky. I thought about that a lot. Like, what's the difference between this and climate change? And the difference is we
It's a
can't
private
really
sector
quantify
thing.
climate change, right? I mean, if Sandy happens and when we have things like the Gulf and when we have rapid weather events, some of us internalize that and feel it, but some of us don't. And literally with acid rain, it was, okay, the paint on your car is getting stripped off and business came together and everybody came together, but it took an existential crisis to make that happen. And we can't wait that long on climate because we won't have that easy of a solution.
Yeah, and
But-
like
but
paint jobs
they-
are expensive.
yeah, but devil's advocate again. You could
So-
just have small business create like acid rain umbrellas, put people to work.
We're saying Diablo's advocate now.
Wow, that's some wit right
Thanks for
there.
the plug.
Can you give us the time? When was acid rain horrible?
It
Oh,
was
I get
horrible
it
in the
now.
late '80s, and when Bush ran for office, actually, everybody agreed on it. It was something that became a pretty consensus issue. They got a debate during the presidential debates, and the Congress turned around, passed it in a few months.
Which
but
country was this? What country did they all agree on? The Congress and the president? Which
you
country
know,
was
it
that?
was like swept
Sweden?
swept under the rug. Just
Finland.
one of those.
What cities was it worst in the late 80s?
It was much worse in the Northeast. California again was kind of ahead of the curve. We had extreme smog problems in Southern California at the time, so we had some of our own regulations that were already starting to address the solution. But Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey were really the drivers behind that bill.
Cool. All right, let's
crazy.
move on.
Oh no.
Yeah, so I've spent some time recently with this anecdote that has become a huge part of the early lore of global warming advocacy. And I've been talking to people who were around in DC at the time, including some staffers who participated in this hearing. And I think this is just like an interesting story of how things get twisted in Washington. But the question to introduce the anecdote is, what year was the first global warming hearing held in Congress, where really the American people heard the phrase global warming?
Inconvenient
for the
truth.
first time?
Al Gore.
Yeah, everybody Al Gore. So like 1990.
When was he born?
Al Gore, right? I don't know.
The answer's Al Gore. I don't know
Yeah,
about these
it's, I
numbers.
don't know about
Al
years.
Al
or
Gore
anything.
isn't a year.
Whenever
Yeah.
Al Gore
In
was
the year
I
of
either
Al
born.
Gore of our Lord.
I don't think you could measure time in Al Gore's.
Can't you?
That would be interesting.
I do.
I'll give you a hint.
300 Al Gores.
Yeah.
But there you go.
So Gore
That'd
did
be good for
Gore did
1987.
actually not host the hearing, despite that's one of the myths that has gone out there. He was not the
First
senator.
Are you
who
saying you
helped-
don't like Al Gore, Brian? Is that what you're saying?
So
He
he
was
was
an
the one
inconvenience.
that made it clear to everyone in America that it was a big problem, but there was
Well,
one
so there
person-
was this hearing that we're getting at with this question, and the hearing happened. We're going to talk about the guy who testified on the next slide, and the next day, the New York Times ran this ominous headline that said, "NASA scientist tells Congress global warming has begun." They got the front page in the New York
Wow.
Times, their paper of
They
record.
just like to go on Twitter.
That
a
wasn't the
lot.
date
They're
book. That was the
not
name
real
of the fucking like
scientists.
theater and the name of the production that they were coming up with in a musical. I think.
Alright.
Anyway.
Well, in 1974, they were still on acid rain for
Exactly.
sure. So
It had to be
Audience.
after that.
Do we
I
have-
think.
probably
Do we have
after.
thoughts
Uh,
at the answer?
Who was there?
1 in
Come
4
on.
chance.
All right, hold on. We haven't had a yes from over here.
1988.
She is correct.
Oh, Eureka.
1988.
Come on up.
1988.
All right.
1988.
Well, you know, with global
1988
warming,
is
one of
gonna be
the
great.
potential results will be that the polar bears go extinct. Should be very sad. So, in
But
case
not
they
the
do, we got
bunnies.
this great notepad with a polar bear face on it.
Oh
so you
my
can see that.
God, girl! I thought there was a condom in here that you could use
Yeah.
too with your boyfriend. Look at that shit.
It's
Fucking
our
supermodel. Hello, hey lady. What is your name? You are Lindsay.
Face.
Lindsay
It's our
Lohan,
face
honey.
super imposed together on the where the polar bears are.
It was
The answer is 1988.
1988.
1988.
So here's to me what's interesting about that answer is that's not that long
Wait,
ago.
the
right?
puppet guy?
Right? Yeah, we're gonna talk about Hanson, but
Mr. Rogers?
Henson
no, Jim
Hansen.
The puppet.
Henson.
The Muppets? Oh my God, the Muppets has
Muppets?
something
Is
to
that
do
him?
with this?
Hanson is a great band, though, by the way.
Hanson. This is Hanson in 20 years.
Okay, that's choice.
Do-wop, da,
Do, do,
da,
do,
do,
Jim
wop.
Hansen.
Do-da-da-do-wop,
Do,
da-da-do.
Global warming.
That's pretty good. You guys should go on tour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Didn't really mean that, but yeah, okay.
If
We have more where that came from.
you should do that while this runs in the background.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm flaming. That's
That's
me.
what gonorrhea
Yeah.
feels like.
Flaming Earth.
That's what the Sahara feels like.
I love that laugh, whoever that is. That's
Yes.
so adorable.
I've peed this way.
I peed this way.
That's true.
let's go back one to Hanson.
Okay, yeah. We just,
All right, so
Hanson knowledge.
not Jim Hansen, it's a different Jim. Just a sec, what made you say 1988? Just out of total curiosity. When you were born. Okay. Well, thanks for giving us your
Okay.
age. Just thought I'd leave
Excuse
there.
me. Okay, you're young. We get it.
You're
baby.
one
Yeah.
smart 1-year-old.
Who feels old? Okay.
You're a millennial. Okay, bitch. We get it.
She was listening to congressional hearings in her crib,
It
apparently.
was around when I was born, 1992. Okay, bitch. You're fucking young. Okay. We get it now.
So
You're
anyway,
pretty. I love your
to
hair.
me, what's
Hey.
interesting about that is that wasn't that long ago, right? It was like not even 30 years ago. And we've
Totally.
had this brief window of history where we actually had to act really fast. It was the first time anybody from a federal agency even came and articulated this as a problem, and it just has turned out we haven't had that long to tackle it. And Jim Hansen is the guy. You should know that name because we would actually be nowhere on climate in this whole world without him. He was the chief NASA scientist who was measuring from places all over the globe, and he started to see this phenomenon. And you know, he was like the original whistleblower in this world. I mean,
original
he went to Congress and
Best blower.
So he was a NASA.
Yeah.
he's still alive. He's still
Which
charging.
prison is he in?
Yeah. Why
So
does
you
he look
said
like?
he's NASA scientist first, and then he came and testified as a NASA scientist?
Exactly. Yeah. And
Okay.
and so it had a lot of weight. It wasn't some kooky environmentalist
Yeah.
from Berkeley coming into Congress. This was their guy.
Not a
from-
hippie from Arcadia saying, try this weed, man. It's getting hot inside. Congress.
Wow, that is really important. That 30 years ago that he came up and started talking about
Yeah,
it.
so here's this story
Wow.
that's gotten away from us on the left with what happened that day. The guy who hosted the hearing is this Colorado senator at the time. His name was Tim Worth, and
He ain't worth shit. Okay.
yeah,
Tim's
yeah,
worthless.
Yeah. And he's a good guy. He was one of these centrist Democrats. He was one of Clinton's co-chairs in the '92 campaign. He's definitely one of like the new Democrats who was elected in a pretty, let's just call it a purple state. And so he wasn't out on the fringe. But he has spent a lot of time with Hansen, and he really started to get conviction on this issue. And he decided he wanted to host this hearing. And so he told his staff to research what would be a good chance of being like a really hot day in DC to make the point at this hearing, okay?
Oh my gosh, the emotional connection.
Yeah, just to make like the visual emotional connection.
You wouldn't do this during the winter in DC.
Imagine running around in bikinis, women. It's so hot that they have to be in their bikinis. It's the worst.
Oh,
Oh my
stop,
God,
Florentina.
imagine
You're going to make me want to
supermodels.
throw up.
Imagine supermodels having to wear.
I know.
It's,
Yeah, I think you sold it well.
did he make his point?
Yeah, so he made the point better than he could have possibly imagined. His staff came up with a date. They gave it to him. They held the hearing, and to this day, it has turned out to be the hottest day ever recorded in Washington.
Wow.
The day they actually did that hearing.
That's a good way to remember it. The
and-
hottest day ever
Yeah,
recorded in DC
it was
was
the,
the
it was
day
the,
that
hot,
he did
the hottest
this?
day ever that they did this hearing. So
Wow.
on top of that, and this is the part
is.
this is the part I've just in recent weeks heard conflicting versions of this, but the lore is his staff opened the windows the morning of the hearing in the Rayburn House office of the Rayburn, the Dixon the Senate building where they were having this hearing. And the idea was they'd open the windows and the air conditioning would trip off and it would just make the room actually like completely boil. And if you look at the film, and I've gone back to try to grab the film from C-SPAN, and you can see Hansen, which it doesn't show in this picture, is pouring sweat. And so the room is obviously hot for some reason. And the cameras are there, and the reporters are kind of like taken by the whole thing. And it just worked. And it's a great example of, selling matters in these things. You have to have
So-
like visual things that make an impact.
Yeah, so instead of like, hot girls in bikinis, it was this like really sweaty, gross, middle-aged white man. Like, watch out, we have to stop this now.
Close, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
It worked.
Not
I will
a
concede
fantasy.
that is a better point, yeah.
We were asked how hot was it?
Yeah, I think it was 101 outside, and nobody knows exactly what the room was. So it obviously boiled. If people know Washington, D.C.
And how many hot
summer,
people
Oh,
attended?
Another
You know?
question?
Intellectually, when was like climate change introduced? Like, because I heard something that it was maybe in the 70s. It was prior to this, like in like scientific circles and stuff. When was that?
Yeah, scientists had been talking about it for a while. They hadn't used that phrase. They hadn't said climate change. They hadn't been global warming. They talked about the greenhouse gas effect. That actually goes back like 150 years in terms of generally understanding what the greenhouse gas effect was. But what Hansen was the first time that anybody measured it was actually happening. It was totally theoretical.
And
until
here it's 0.18 degrees Celsius was his measurement increase, right? Okay.
yeah, you know this stuff better than I do. Good job on the wiki research.
That's Celsius, Alan. What is that in Fahrenheit? We don't know Celsius. We're not.
Yeah.
What is 0.1, 0.2? Is that like 0.4 or no? It's like is it a whole degree in Fahrenheit at least? No. No. Oh, it's not even. Okay. All right. Okay. Bless.
I just made you look like an
But
idiot.
now it's-
How,
now
what
it's
is that
up
in
to-
Al
But
Gore's
isn't that
though?
the-
How many Al Gores is that in
Yeah.
terms of heat?
Yeah. In terms of
That's
scale.
two sweaty Al Gores hugging you for about approximately 5 minutes.
One Al Gore
That was the
jet.
transformation. I should have won. I should have won.
But isn't that the same argument that people use against the theory that, wow, words, okay.
Is
Like-
it hot in here,
Like,
Florentine?
no, because don't they say, well, that's not enough, like that's not even a big change. So
Is it so
why is
significant?
it global warming? Because it's like 0.6 degrees hotter out.
As opposed to like global slightly warming?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mildly warming versus
Yeah.
moderate. and
So
severe.
all great question, and all the scientists have gotten together and they've come up with sort of the point of no return calculations. And I don't want to do the math on this because there's different theories about like what exactly the tipping point is where you can't go back on it.
And we've passed that.
I thought we passed that.
Yeah. not
Yeah,
too long ago
no,
with the
we
Blasphemy.
haven't quite passed it yet, but we're about to pass it. And,
Oh, I
and
thought we
it's
did.
and it is
Ah.
and
No,
that's
my Facebook
that's,
feed told me that we
Yeah.
passed it.
and that's
Um,
that's a measurement that international scientists, hundreds of international scientists look at every year, study every year. And again, we've actually only had 30 years to get in front
Yeah.
of that number, and we're just about at the tipping point.
Oh.
All right. Let's go on to
Scary.
the next question.
Okay.
Tip and point. Tip and point, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Jim Hansen.
Okay, so back to the solutions to all these things. Who was the first president who actually proposed a national carbon tax? And we're going to start getting more into the politics here of like how things survive and how things die in Washington and in state capitals around the country.
As in companies would be taxed a certain amount based on their emissions.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have defined it. So we talked about what cap and trade, which is kind of a wonky concept, but a carbon tax is very simple. A carbon tax is simply, here is a price you pay for your emissions. You emit whatever this thing is that we're trying to tax, and you pay a certain amount to the government. The idea is it gets redistributed into clean energy programs. It's not that government pockets this and uses this for, Trump Tower vacations, but it is meant to be a tax to just stop a certain behavior. So who was the first president to actually propose one?
Hoover?
Hoover, that's a good
I was
idea.
gonna say Herbert Hoover.
Can we
fuck
say
it.
Nixon and Eisenhower again? Even though they're
Abraham
not on
Lincoln,
there?
maybe.
Say whatever you want.
Alexander Hamilton.
Obviously, it's none
He
of
wasn't a
those.
president, was he?
So, a one in
Audience?
four
Yes.
chance.
Let's do it. Audience.
I didn't know that.
Who was the first president for a national carbon tax? All right, hold on. We have an
Ooh.
answer
All right,
over here.
all right.
Hold on.
All right, what do we
Hold
got
on.
here?
I'm gonna go with Carter.
Carter.
I'm going to go with Carter. Incorrect.
That peanut farmer's not going to tax the American people. All right, what do we got?
Wrong.
Okay, it's not like I'm a fan or anything, but I'm gonna try Bill again. Bill?
Bill's correct.
Bill Clinton. Come on down.
Come on down and get your prize. Honey. Come down and get your prize.
Why'd you think it was Bill Clinton?
Oh.
That's correct. Well,
Phone a friend or something? Or, yeah.
you said you're not a fan of Bill Clinton?
Well, I didn't want people to assume I was a fan of Bill Clinton just because,
Because he
I
played that
mentioned him
sax,
twice.
girl.
Oh my God.
Have you ever had a fantasy of, I don't know,
You better take a
being
photo,
Bill
honey.
Clinton?
Maybe.
Oh.
Yeah, maybe now is your chance to be Bill Clinton.
I wish I answered the question.
You can totally wear that while your husband's fucking you. Yeah.
Bill Clinton, everybody.
That is it. Congratulations.
There it is.
Wait, shouldn't you be
Excellent.
Yeah. Or he can wear it while you're fucking him.
Doesn't
Whatever
that
you have to-
mask come with cigars?
Yeah.
Because we have a dress in the back
Yeah.
that Justin will be
I
wearing.
can wear that also.
So-
We also have, I think there's a Monica Lewinsky mask
yeah.
in here as well.
And
You
of
guys
course
can
the
match it.
oil back there. So it'll be a party afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
good
getting-
job. All right. Yep.
Congratulations.
Bye,
Eureka.
honey.
Congratulations.
What are you gonna do with that mask, by the way?
Get a raise at her.
She's gonna use it as a toilet bowl.
Yeah, she
That's
she
right,
gave.
honey.
That was a real sly look. Oh, look at him. He's excited. He's
Okay, so-
excited.
Oh my God, that is a cute ass mask.
He
Look at that
just-
shit.
I know.
It sticks
I'm-
out. Can you wear it real quick? Let's just see how it looks like on your
You have
face
to wear
right
it for
now.
the rest of
Oh,
the
yeah,
night.
let's
Yeah, we wanted to. Yeah, that doesn't matter.
Oh,
Neither hook-
look
neither
at that.
Yeah,
you,
let's
baby.
leave it on the whole
Leave it on the
time.
whole.
Do
Keep
a
it.
Look at
blunt.
this.
yes.
We have two Bill Clintons in the house that are just
That
like
is good.
pumped on
Pants
each
up,
other.
Pants up.
Pants
Pants
up.
up.
Pants
Pants
off.
I thought you were saying pants off.
I thought it was pants off.
No.
Pants off, dance off.
Yeah, that's
All
gonna
right.
happen later tonight when her husband is like with him.
Yeah.
Next
We got
slide.
the
Here we
oil. We
go.
got the
So,
bill.
so what's important about this moment in the sweep of this
We
stuff?
need to stay
when we-
serious, guys. Sorry.
No,
Okay,
no, no,
like,
I'm not. Yes.
I'm sorry.
But when we
Florentina, we're doing too much. Yeah.
when,
were
when we
told that
think
to-
when we think about how this issue has become so toxic in Washington, why people won't even bring it up for a vote anymore. And I think we've already
Yeah.
established it was never really bipartisan.
And it was so toxic, Britney Spears can't even sing about it anymore. Anyway, go on.
But it's it's something that you can't even hold a hearing on anymore without getting a primary run against you if you're a Republican. And this is the moment where I think that happened. And the very short version of what happened under the Clinton administration. Which sounds weird these days, but the only Clinton administration, what happened was...
Wait, this was to all energy forms?
Yeah, Clinton proposed what was called a BTU tax, which stands for British Thermal Units, and it was meant to be a broad-based energy sector tax. Remember, Gore was his vice president. Gore had written Earth in the Balance and had become famous for articulating this issue. And there was a major budget that needed to be passed when Clinton came into office, and one of the ideas to raise revenue was what would be the first national energy tax in the country. And without, again, getting too into the weeds on the details, Clinton administration proposed it. Gore led the efforts on it as vice president. The House actually passed this BTU tax. And these two billionaires from Kansas came awake all of a sudden, and exactly, and decided, oh my God, this is an existential threat to our business, and we're going to get involved in American politics like you've never seen before. And and the Senate dropped it before it even came up for a vote. The Kochs ran primaries against Republicans who had voted for it in the House, got heavily involved in the next cycle, and the Democrats lost their congressional majorities, which they had held for 40 years.
Wow.
Okay, think about that.
Really? 40 years?
40 years they lost their congressional majorities on a bill that never even came up for a vote in the upper house. So these House Democrats walked the plank on this useless vote that just turned out to be political suicide for them. And from that moment on, people actually would use the phrase, if you engage on climate, you will get BTU'd. And that's what they mean. You will have, you will
Oh my
your
God.
political
Have you been BTU'd before?
I do. I don't usually mind, but fuck for that story.
You down with BTU?
You down with BTU?
Yeah,
BTU and I. All right. Anyway,
Wow. So
that sucks.
so we had Democrats in what
Democrats had super majorities in the Senate and the House. They had those for 40 years. Again,
That's a majority of seats in Congress.
Yeah, it's a majority in each house, but what I mean by a super majority is it's such a high majority that the Republicans can't usually even filibuster or slow things down. I mean, the numbers, and Obama had that too for the first 2 years when I served there. So there's these times where you get not just a majority. Majorities are not what they're cracked up to be. If you have a 2-seat majority like the Republicans have in the Senate right now, it's really not that much different than being 2 seats in the minority, because you're always going to lose 2 votes on something. But when you have a super majority, meaning like the minority party can't filibuster or slow things down, that's when stuff gets passed. And that's the House Democrats took a brave vote here. The Senate never even touched it.
Exactly.
Were there any new proposals after that?
Yeah, we're going to talk about the one when I served there and what happened there, and it's one of those stories of history doesn't repeat itself, but does rhyme.
Bill.
That's right.
Oh snap!
Look at you. Did you meet Monica Lewinsky? I'm a huge
What
fan.
happened? Did you know?
What did you like?
Tell
what
us
is
everything.
Yeah, and like how many? What is the position that?
What's
she
the
prefer-
coolest thing that he told you?
Bill's a cool guy. He looks cool anyway. Anyway, question.
And I know we're going to get to it. Just out of curiosity, is this the first time that a corporation became so heavily involved in politics like that?
No, I mean we've going back to the days of trust busting, and the reason Teddy Roosevelt started to break up Standard Oil and the trust was what he viewed as overarching influence of corporations in politics.
It was Rockefeller?
Yeah, I mean it was a few concentrated corporate interests, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Mellon. I mean, there's like a few families that held enormous influence, and ultimately, we had some reforms after Watergate because of concerns about the same things. I think what was different about the Kochs is just the scale. There's this book out that some of you have probably heard of called Dark Money by Jane Mayer, and she is probably well on her way to winning the Pulitzer for it. It's a seriously important book, and I'd encourage everybody to read it. And she traces the history of the Koch brothers. And I'm not sure, you've touched on something really important. I'm not sure there's anything like totally new about what they did other than just the massive scale. They pumped hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into politics. And if you put $10 million into a congressional race, you can buy whatever you want for that. Now, they've had not as much success at the presidential level, for sure. They backed like a series of losing presidential candidates, Romney and Scott Walker and others. But you can buy a lot of seats in Congress when you throw money around.
Yeah, with hundreds of millions, because that's what their entire enterprise is based on. Oil production, refining.
I want to slit my wrist
now.
Now.
Just still blows my
Sorry,
mind.
I feel like I'm being a downer.
A little bit.
Yeah.
That's okay,
What the
though.
hell?
That's okay. I'm on
Coke
upper.
is supposed to be fun.
Yeah. I thought it was an upper.
Maybe they should call themselves the Cherry Koch brothers. Would that?
Oh,
Question.
yeah.
All right, hold on a second. Let's do the question.
Question.
Even worse, Diet Coke.
I love
Since
you too,
you-
by the way. You guys are fucking my fans. I love it.
Since you're in advocacy, then you can argue both sides in the case in Washington. So what is the Koch brothers' argument for why business should not be involved? Businesses are going to be affected by these policies? Like, are they arguing that this is going to affect their competition? Like, if we're going to have all these strict rules on emissions and carbon taxes, we are competing against countries like China and India that don't have those restrictions, right? So what's the rebuttal to that?
Yeah, they don't actually, it's interesting you say that. They don't make that direct argument too much because I think the logic chain's kind of weak. If you accept, let's just use acid rain as the example. If you accept the basic premise that this is something that can destroy the human race, then your business can't succeed if you don't have customers, right? You either accept the premise of this and then you agree to a solution, or you don't accept the premise. And what they've done is challenge the premise. And so the argument has been to come up with this junk science to go out and say the science is not settled on climate change. That's been the foundation for everything that they've accomplished. But it really stems from saying, hey, actually, let's not be hasty here. We don't know if this is true, and we're not going to dwell a lot on the junk science behind that stuff. But they've just fabricated tomes and tomes of information to cast doubt on the basic premise of whether global warming's true or not.
All right, let's move it along. It still blows my mind.
Is everyone just feeling sad and
A little
depressed?
Can we see
Yeah.
the polar bear pictures?
Can I see a
again?
picture of a baby
We should
or
have
something
like a
that
kitten
make
in
me feel
between these.
normal?
Yeah.
Yeah, the polar bear.
Wow, that's a lot of money in politics.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been pretty tough on the right here, but what actually makes me the most livid is when I think about the self-inflicted wounds from the left on climate change. And so we're going to spend most of the next few slides talking about the missed opportunities that we've had despite all this. And maybe, to me, this is actually like an optimistic message, because to me, if the coach pulls you aside at halftime and says, guys, the other side's not better than us, we're just turning the ball over too much. And if we stop doing that, we can actually be ahead.
So in other words,
I
don't be the.
I don't get sports references. You're
Don't-
gonna
I was
have
a
something-
coach, and
You're basically saying don't be the Warriors from last the championship.
Okay.
Yeah, right. If
Don't
Kerr
choke.
pulls Curry
So
over
like
at
if we were a
halftime,
like
and
if
he's
we were
like,
I will say this: I did coach volleyball for 14-year-old girls, and whenever I said that, it was usually because that other team was kicking our fucking ass.
you were just
so.
trying to put
Yeah,
a
yeah.
face on it.
And
yeah.
I went to Coachella this year, so does that? count?
Yeah, I think
That's
we
sports.
kick our.
Walking.
That doesn't really. Is that?
I think we kick our own asses on this issue, and despite all the things that I just told you, which are all true, like they've bought seats, the bad guys have run primaries, they've done criminally illegal things that we haven't gotten to yet. But despite all that, we have had some amazing chances to actually turn the tide. And in each one of those, we have just totally dropped the ball, to stick with the
Just
sports
quickly,
metaphor.
what's the going rate for a congressional seat? Are we looking at 10 million? Could you bargain it down to 8?
Wildly different depending on the media markets. I mean, I work with some candidates who have 2 or 3 media markets, and you could spend $20 million on a congressional race if you want. You could also buy some in rural places for
Is
half
that
a million.
guarantee, or is it? Do you have to take their word for it?
No,
It comes in
no.
Starbucks gift
Just-
cards. It's the
Yeah.
whole box
Damn
of them.
that you can't combine.
Yeah.
What is the importance of these missed opportunities for the Democrats? And
Well, the
Living on our
importance for all of you in this audience is like as engaged people and people who are involved in civic life. You read, you come to shows like this. There will come another moment where we're going to have an opportunity, and this is not one of those moments now.
Was it last time?
Washington
It
is
won't be
Washington is
now.
obviously at a low point, but we're going to talk about some of these opportunities, and like the main thing I would just ask you to take away from it is when we have that next opportunity, let's not drop the ball again ourselves, and this is one of them.
right.
I lived in Florida during this election, and
God.
I think this race gets misunderstood in so many different ways. But the question is which third-party candidate received nearly 100,000 votes in Florida? That should say.
Okay.
In the 2000 presidential election. So who was it?
David
the
Bowie.
alligators. I don't know.
I think we
Alligator, a random
alligators.
alligator. That's a good
Which one
point.
is the closest to an alligator on this?
All right, I think we.
All right, I think we can
heard
get
it.
this
All
one.
right, hold
Yeah,
on.
here we go.
Ralph Nader.
Nader, it is.
It's Nader. I think we made that kind of easy.
Come
but-
on down.
sir. And collect your
Come
prize.
down, sir. Nader, we haven't heard from him in a while, though.
What happened to him?
Yeah.
We have, though, Nader's book. It's called Breakthrough Power and Lose an Election. Okay, that's not the true title.
Yeah.
It is Breakthrough Power. It's easier than you think. It's in his words. So this is a Ralph Nader book you can read, and now we're going to poop on him
Yeah.
for the next
You
next
can use it. You
section.
can put it under your coffee table. Give it up for him.
Give it up.
And you could throw it away like a vote for Ralph Nader.
You could burn it.
This is his Tinder profile, by the way.
Ah.
He's 6'4",
He's so
175
grunge.
pounds,
Yeah.
and he has a pop. He squads up.
6'4".
He's got squad goals.
Wow.
Maybe show the
Ralph
bonus
Nader
question
for
just to give
pussy. Wow. Okay.
the gist of this question.
Ralph Nader for pussy, get it.
Okay, so by the way, that should have said 100,000. I think we got off the math. The point was he got about 100,000 votes in Florida. How many votes did Gore lose Florida by? Just a round number? Anybody? No, not. It was only.
Hanging Chad.
Keep going.
That's all right.
537. He lost the presidency.
can't Google
She
stuff.
gets
You
that one.
can't Google it. What are you doing?
Well, you saw it.
Yeah. 500.
All right, you got 537. All right, another globe for you. It's hot. It's warming. There you go.
Hey, would you date this guy? No. One of the
She
most
saw
annoying.
it. She saw it. We went accidentally forward
Yeah.
the through slide.
From
Okay.
I think
How
that's
I
how I
Met
met your mother.
What's the significance?
Yeah, the significance? Like we know about hanging chads, we know about Teresa Lepore, we know about the recount and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, none of that matters if the Green Party candidate doesn't run for president. He got 100,000 votes, and you can have the Supreme Court doctor the math however you want, but the fact is Gore's president if Ralph Nader doesn't run on the Green Party ticket, supposedly to stop climate change, which was his stated platform. And he was running against the person who had built his entire career, of course, on articulating climate change. Why did that happen? It's a really interesting story, actually. Al Gore was running for president at the end of the Clinton administration, and not much had happened during the Clinton administration on climate and environmentalism, period. We talked about the failed opportunity and the BTU tax. And environmentalists were getting restless, and they were actually kind of bitter that 8 years had gone by without a lot of progress. And there was this proposal for a massive development in the Everglades in Florida that would have paved over about a third of the Everglades and turned it into a big extension of the Miami airport.
Wow.
And it needed a bunch of federal permits to make it happen. And the environmentalists rightfully wanted Gore to come out as vice president and tell the federal agencies absolutely not to grant these permits. And Gore went to his Florida campaign advisors, one of whom was secretly a lobbyist for this airport project and did not tell Gore that.
Oh, wow.
And they had Gore to get involved. And the environmentalists went apoplectic and recruited Nader to run. And it cost Gore the presidency. And we would have had climate change legislation for sure.
That's some
had
Game
that
of
not-
Thrones
What was
shit.
that name of that lobbyist?
Yeah, Justin.
You know,
no.
I know his name. I don't.
Dox him.
I don't.
His
yeah,
name was
I mean,
Littlefinger.
it's not. Yeah, it's
Littlefinger.
not a secret. His name's Mitch Berger, and
Daenerys
Yeah.
Stormborn.
I'm not.
Burgers are the
I'm not
worst.
saying anything that hasn't been.
Been said, yeah.
It's in the public record if you look closely. If you want to
It's
sue
so
me for
awesome. I
defamation,
didn't know
that's
that
fine.
politics was so gossipy. It's
I
like
know.
It
Fucking
is.
high
Real
school all over
Housewives
again.
of the
It's
White
like
House.
a gossip girl
Okay.
with horrendous repercussions.
We've always
Real
had
White
money
Housewives.
in
And did you
politics,
hear
and
that-
that's a really good example of money in politics, as was the Koch brothers, as is the Miami airport wanting to be extended and developed.
But now I
And
have to drive
so
3
this is
hours.
one
and
of the
hours to get
examples
there.
of being the Democrats kind of shooting themselves in the foot with wanting to.
Hey, let's 100,000 votes. He loses by 537. Let's remember, if you want to go the ballot route to explain that race, the ballot was designed by a Democratic politician named Teresa Lepore, and this whole meltdown happened in one of the Democratic counties in the country. So we are really bad on the left at looking in the mirror and taking responsibility when we totally screw something up. And I think there's no better example of it than the 2000 election. And I blame the
great
Supreme Court
example.
too. Like, it's easy to say, oh, it was a 5-4 vote and we shouldn't have a presidency decided by a 5-4 vote. That's all true, but that doesn't excuse the missteps along the way.
He got a
Yeah.
total of 2.9 million votes, which was about 2.75% of the vote.
And the ballot has a very broy name, Chad. You want to
Chad.
hang with Chad? Not
would,
really.
yeah.
No, I'm not going to vote.
I wonder how Gore would have handled the 2001 terrorist attack.
Yeah, that's.
Yes,
that
so
would have
do
been different too.
Alan. I think about that all the
Yeah.
time.
What? a
But
downer.
Counterfactual.
maybe it's another topic
Alex.
someday. But Dick Cheney wouldn't have been there to make the policy, so
I
it
wonder
would
what
have
have
turned out pretty
happened.
different.
Yeah.
That sounds like one of those like Hulu
Oh,
Series
shows,
alternative
like
histories.
alternate history. It's
Or like
we've had
something in
enough,
Black
okay? Stop
Mirror
living in
that
the
would
past.
be made in Netflix, you know.
All right,
Called
Bryan, what's
Mitch
this question?
Berger.
Mitch
Okay.
Berger.
He died in. Okay.
Name the only
Here's my hint for this one. I want you to think closely about the answer, closely about the answer to this question. Who is the only leader of a U.S. congressional house, meaning the House of Representatives or the Senate, who has actually passed a national carbon tax through their chamber? It didn't become law, but this person passed it through their chamber. Think closely.
Bernie Sanders.
I like pass it through your chambers like a euphemism. This like
Yeah.
I farted this bill out.
Yes.
It didn't go anywhere else, but it sat there for a while and it was taxed.
And he was the only leader of a U.S. congressional house.
All right.
Perfect.
National
Who
car.
is it?
Okay.
Audience?
I'm going to say it's not Gingrich.
All right,
Not-
hold on,
it
hold
is
on.
not Newt Gingrich.
I'm going to take the risk and say it is Gingrich.
He just said no.
All right, hold on.
Nice try,
He
Mitch
just
Berger.
said no.
Don't drink
Nice
the
try.
oil.
You're in the right time period.
Stop
though.
it.
One more time.
Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, it is our congresswoman where we're sitting right here. It's Nancy
Eureka!
Pelosi. That was the
Come on
hint.
up.
Think closely, okay? Thanks. Okay.
Oh, Eureka!
Come on down
down.
for Nancy Pelosi.
Think globally.
That was a hard
And what
question.
you win is one of our wonderful Eureka T-shirts.
Huh?
Eureka, there it is.
Yeah.
All right, model it, post it up on Instagram. We'll
I think it's pretty cool that that's our congresswoman, and I think she doesn't get any credit for this, actually, in the history books.
No, that's actually the expression she had when she passed it through her chamber.
Okay.
That's what it looked like.
Every time she goes to her chamber.
Nancy Pelosi is, by any objective measure, the most powerful woman in American history. Okay, she became the third in heir to the presidency. She was briefly the Speaker of the House and is still the minority leader. She is.
Did
our-
they say she talked too much because she's a woman?
I mean,
Yeah.
she.
Why
I,
does she-
I
why
think
does she
she's an
keep the seat?
underappreciated historic figure, and she's your congresswoman. I think you should all be pretty proud of her. I think she's, she was elected to Congress when she was 41, I think, or 47. Didn't even get involved in politics until later in life, and quickly
Wow.
rose through the ranks.
Yes.
and
Wow.
Florentine,
pretty
you better
tough-
get on that
She
shit.
just has that natural
on there.
instinct.
She comes from a political family. Her dad was the mayor of Baltimore when she was growing up, but she had never run for office. She was a activist in the city of San Francisco, raised her children, and decided she wanted to go a different route in life. And rose.
And she lives
rose
here in
to
the city,
street.
doesn't she? Since she lives in the
Yeah, she's like,
Richmond district.
Mission.
Preceding-
I think it must have been these instincts in her eyes. She just went mad dogging different people.
So, Brian, what was the importance of that national carbon
Try that.
price? of that
So
tax?
here's the importance of it. This was during the first 2 years of the Obama administration when I was there. The bill was called Waxman-Markey, and this was another one of those chances that we had. The Clinton administration we talked about had big Democratic majorities. We in the Obama administration had even bigger Democratic majorities. This was after the 2008 economic meltdown. We had 60 votes in the Senate, which means we could do whatever we wanted. We didn't need one Republican vote for anything. And we had a huge majority in the House. And Nancy Pelosi passed a cap and trade bill, and it never even came up for a vote in the Senate. Does that sound familiar to anybody of what we just talked about? It's the history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And she passed this bill, and to pass that bill, we had to go member by member into some really tough districts where Democrats had barely won their seats to begin with. We're only in office because 2008 was just such a tidal wave from the Great Recession and Obama coattails. But we had to go to members in Virginia and West Virginia and coal states and get them to vote for this bill, and they lost their seats in retribution, again by the Koch brothers, and it never even came up for a vote in the Senate. But it didn't come up for a vote in the Senate for a different reason, which is, again, an enormous self-inflicted wound, which is that we had lost functioning control of the Senate by that time. Does anybody remember what happened as a special election? Yes, so Scott Brown got elected in a special election in Massachusetts to Ted Kennedy's Senate seat. Ted Kennedy, the lion of the Senate, died in the most liberal state in the country, and we had a special election, and we lost it to a Republican. And that was during the time period that this bill had passed the House, had not come up to the Senate yet. And we could actually never even get it up for a vote in the Senate.
Did
So
you make
Nancy lost her majorities in large part because of that vote.
Did you make a dead Kennedy joke? That was
Didn't mean to.
cheeky. Hey, who's become the comedian? I have a quick question.
Yes.
Yeah, Justin will answer it for you.
Yes, miss.
excuse me.
Yes.
If the oil spills were so bad,
Mhm.
then how come Nancy Pelosi's pearls are hella white?
That's a really good question.
No oil spills.
Good point.
in sight.
It's a fair question.
That's a really good question. Next slide, please.
That's why we elect the representatives we do. This is our constituents' logic. That's
Scott Brown. You mentioned Scott Brown.
Scott Brown,
I feel like
Yeah.
who was a naked model.
Yeah.
I was gonna say.
Next
Next slide, please.
I know.
Would
You
you
have a
have
slide
voted-
of him.
Would you have voted for Scott Brown?
And had I known if he was a naked, I only found out that he was a naked model after the fact. So
I imagine a question like that actually being asked in Congress and like with an actual comedian there. It would be funny. Just
totally.
Like out of legislators and lawmakers to laugh like a
Exactly.
little bit like that. And
We
it
could
maybe
turn
would
them
bring
around,
people
guys.
together.
My question is, why does she wear her ass beads on her neck?
Jesus.
That's my
You are in
question.
your-
Like,
Why are they so white?
She wears them as trophies, okay?
Okay, because I see. It connects all the way to.
Trophies? Is that how it works?
I guess so.
It's
Yeah.
like, oh,
We're on the
before you leave
politics.
the next morning, please take this souvenir.
Exactly.
Yeah. Something to remember by. Enjoy the brunch.
That's why I voted for her anyway. She's not
All right.
afraid to wear ass beads on her neck.
Yeah,
That's
count
fucking
them. How
no-
many
That's a very-
congressmen
That's
are
some
there?
gangster ass shit.
It's a very San
is it?
Francisco
It's the
thing.
same amount as the amount of congressmen. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Counting ass
Exactly.
beads.
Yeah.
Jesus.
One for every Congress.
On
She's a powerful
to the
woman.
next question.
Okay, so the last few questions are about what are known in the media as the solar wars. And I'm going to give you the very abbreviated history of the solar wars through my distorted lens from living through them. I was serving the Obama administration. The Republicans won back control of Congress in 2010. And I left immediately because I was in the general counsel's office and didn't want to be responding to Solyndra subpoenas all day. And I went to what at the time was called Constellation Energy, which was this energy conglomerate. And what was happening at the time, despite our failures to actually pass legislation, is we had this amazing technology breakthrough going on in distributed solar, meaning solar on people's rooftops, in their backyards, things that you didn't need to ask government permission to do. And it was based right here in San Francisco and in Silicon Valley, and it was catching on all over the country. And the utilities were waking up, and the utilities were seeing solar and saying, oh my God, this is becoming a real threat to our business, and we don't know what to do about it. And the company I went to had a bunch of different business interests, but they were actually trying to do solar. They were actually trying to build solar. At the same time, solar was competing with their other interests. And the job they hired me for was to sort out all these conflicting, warring factions within the company and see if we could get on the same page. And I thought, this is a really cool job. I get to like kind of serve in a bunch of different companies at once, see if we can make sense of this. Company is called Constellation Energy. And I was there for about 10 months, and they announced a merger with an even bigger energy company called Exelon and became the largest energy company in the country. And my new bosses came to me on like literally within an hour of the merger closing, and they said, we know you thought your old job was to help renewables, help solar. Your new job is to kill renewables at all costs, and we're going to show you how to do it.
They give you like a new set of pencils, you know, and pens for
Yeah.
your desk. Say,
Damn,
now it says
Darth Vader.
kill.
In the gay
renewables."
community, we call that flip-flopping.
Yeah, it's like, here's your stormtrooper suit, and like you're just putting on a different.
Wow.
And I thought, you know,
They
this
give you an
Dun,
act.
dun,
Just go and
dun,
start
dun,
slapping.
dun, dun, dun. Solar Wars.
Bitch.
You remember the movie well. You
I
clearly
do.
do.
That pretty much sums up
Solar
Star
Wars. Solar
That's
Wars.
that's
Gotta
one of the
catch 'em all,
craziest.
Solar War.
We've had a guest on the show, Jacob Ward, who one day was he was chief editor of Popular Science, but he was second in line, and then one day his boss quit all of a sudden, and then he became the editor in chief. But that's not as crazy as what happened to you, which was, hey, I'm here for solar, and then the next hour it's like, you're here to kill solar.
Yeah,
And
and
what
so-
was your
And how much
response?
and how much money were you
So-
offered?
So what did you say to
Can I
Senator
continue to live out the
Palpatine?
boyhood fantasy of being in Star Wars? Because like you always see yourself at like the center of these characters, right? And I'm like, okay, well I'm accidentally in the Death Star, and I'm gonna figure out how to blow this thing up, and then I'm gonna leave and I'm gonna blow it up.
Rogue
and
One.
so I,
Yeah.
you know, so I went to these meetings where they plotted the death of the industry, and
Are
I.
you ruining another movie?
No,
Yeah. This is the plot of Rogue One. This is Rogue One.
Kidding me?
the hell?
This is Rogue One, but go on. Yeah.
Luke
sorry.
Skywalker.
It's on my DVR.
So you were plotting?
You went to the meetings. to
Yeah,
learn?
so no,
With
I went there
Senator
and
Palpatine.
ultimately, I left a few months later to lead the solar industry's advocacy and got to fight my old bosses, and it was all a pretty surreal experience. But when I was there, I learned the things that they were up to, and I learned what their weaknesses were, and I used their size against them ultimately
you change
fight
to the dark
solar wars.
side?
Use the force.
Why didn't they like just suspect you? What was? Did you have like a certain
I was
expression?
pretty. I was not.
Yeah, you were pretty.
I was.
What's that? What'd you say?
Yeah, his face was pretty when he went down in that bunker.
Did you put on like your pretty boy makeup?
I was pretty.
Trust
I'm
me.
here to destroy solar.
Oh my God, you got
You said, why is Brian's shirt so much tighter now the next
I
day
was
at work?
gonna
I don't know what's going on.
say.
His nipples are popping out. He can cut off jean shorts.
I
Like,
know.
let's fuck up solar.
It was tucked in at the beginning of the show. I don't know what happened.
Oh, they are very hard.
I want to feel.
That's
Don't
a
worry.
di-
Not with my fingers. Don't worry.
In retrospect, I think I was pretty blatant about
Where's
it.
the
I
oil?
would get
Sorry.
into.
But why would they
This is
keep
belly.
you on if you were blatant that you're like, hey, I'm just...
Here's what I would say in their defense. They encouraged a healthy debate about it to a certain point, but then I wound up in shouting matches with my boss's boss's boss, who at one point called me a communist for supporting solar, and he was Cuban, which I thought was kind of weird.
Well, hey, he would know a communist, wouldn't
Oh
he?
my God, I apologize on my dad's behalf. That would never happen again.
I think I may have pointed that out to him
I
actually, and that
apologize on
didn't help my
behalf of
relationship.
Romania.
But anyway, no, we had these debates, but they kind of knew. They were like, listen, like there's a certain point where we can hack this out for a while, and then you're going to get in line and do these things. And I actually don't think they were very surprised.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
left.
Let me let you finish. Go ahead.
I'm gonna let you finish.
I'm gonna let you
but-
finish, bitch. Go ahead. I have a go. Do they really actually fucking believe what they were telling you in terms of debating, or is it more like are they just trying to convince you
That's such an
otherwise?
interesting question.
Or do they really firmly?
Sometimes you drink the water, man.
I mean, are they just as pugnacious?
Some people believe the Earth is flat.
I know that's true too. So
Sorry,
yeah,
go
my
ahead.
question is, do you believe that they actually believe?
I don't think it's a fascinating
In-
question. I think about that a lot in politics.
Like,
Do
are they
people
just a
actually
believer?
believe the crazy shit that's coming out of
No,
their
but
mouth?
it's so ridiculous. Yeah, that's true
I
too.
don't.
Yeah, but as far as in your experience, obviously you've dealt with them, firsthand. and I
Politics
wonder-
and dating, I think, are the two.
I wonder if you.
I'm going to dodge the question only in a sense. I think most people who are actually in the business of what I do, lobbying, and I don't want to sound self-righteous because we can all get sucked into this. I actually don't
all
think
get
they
sucked,
ever
yeah, that's right.
think in the way of do I believe this or not. They think this is just a job and it's a client and I will do what I'm paid to do. And by the way, that happens on both sides. Okay,
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. Not on mine. Anyway,
I mean, like
perfect.
speak for yourself, Brian. Yeah, we're perfect.
We looked in the mirror today.
Okay. I'm on Social Security.
I know CEOs of clean tech companies who vote Republican quietly, who have committed wanton criminal acts in the name of making a dollar.
Jesus
And I
Christ.
know people on the fossil fuel side who I think are like usually pretty good people, and they just have a job. And like where you stand depends on where you sit. And most
Tell us
people
who.
Where
in
you stand
lobbying-
depends on where you sit. That's right. Folsom Gulch, just down the block. But yes, that's unfortunate.
So you left. You probably took a lot of stationery too with you when you left the company. Like I
Steal
don't
the
care.
stapler.
It's like I'm taking all the staplers on this floor.
Crazy. Oh shit.
didn't take
Anyway.
documents.
You
but
just
That's
yeah.
why I only accept suggested donations of $20 or more.
Yeah, this is yeah.
Okay, so you sit in the meetings, you learn about what their plans are, and then you leave, and then you create an agency
Yes.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Then you go out and have a drink.
I went to solar at that point because even though Exelon was fighting wind and solar and other forms of clean tech, solar is what made them foam at the mouth. Solar is like the thing that just incensed them the most because
Solar.
it was something
Foam
that
at
they
the
did.
mouth, honey.
Sorry.
All the
Sticking with
solar's getting
sticking
me
with
hot.
the thing. Because the difference between solar and every other form of renewable energy is solar was something that people could just do on their own. You didn't need the utility to do it for you. You could put it on your own roof, and that's what made it truly radical to them. And
You
really
could
just
wear it.
scared them. Yeah, you could wear it
You
on
could
a
wear
wrist.
it
Yeah,
as a
the
cock ring,
backpack, weird stuff.
Who here, by the way, uses solar energy or solar power at all?
I sunbathed
In their
today.
Okay, that's good.
We're all solar absorbed.
All right, so yeah, a couple of people here, use solar power. All right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I use it on my calculator. I mean, that works. Right? I need to get an updated calculator.
I use it
You-
for that flower that moves its.
Yeah, my nightlight. my night, like the lights outside in my garden.
What's the significance of the question? And
Yeah, look, the solar wars are the next big opportunity.
Interrupt, Alan. You gotta go.
Okay, let's go to the question.
You know, we've walked through this history, and I'd just remind you kind of how the history builds on itself. Like, we have an opportunity, some bad guy comes along, does something, and we don't get to do it. Then we have another opportunity, inflict a wound ourselves. We have another opportunity, and government doesn't get there for some reason. And solar was the next big opportunity in the sense of, despite everything government had done wrong, Silicon Valley, this city in particular, gave us this big opportunity. And that's what the solar wars have been about. And they're very much centered here for a lot of reasons. And I think the conclusion of them is not over. But in the next slide, we'll talk about, you know, another local connection to kind of show you the people that are on the opposite sides of this fight, because I think it's something that everybody, particularly in this city, should understand.
Quick question.
So what utility was?
What utility?
Let's
So
move
the
on.
question time.
Let's move on.
Sorry.
So we have some questions at the end. So
Later.
what utility fighting solar wars was recently convicted of 6 criminal charges due to a pipeline
Question.
All right.
All right,
What we
who
got here,
had their
people?
hand
I
up
think we made this
first?
one, hopefully.
Have you had an answer? Not yet? All right.
Okay.
PG&E.
PG&E, your friendly neighborhood
up, you're
local
Correct.
utility.
Down.
That's the only one, right?
That's
I mean,
the only
water
answer.
exists too, but I guess.
All right. And so you too can fight fossil fuel with your own solar-powered grasshopper.
Ooh.
Yeah. Start small. There you go. Yeah.
Exactly.
Much better than a fossil fuel grasshopper.
Yeah. You can stick
Better
that
than
up
the
your butt.
gas grasshopper.
So this is another
On
one
September
where I
9th,
think
2010,
it's kind of getting
PG&E
lost.
learned a
I
tragic
think
lesson
we're
we
gonna
can never
pause that
forget.
for 1 second.
You'll
if we
be
can.
seeing these videos for the next
I'll
few
introduce.
months.
I don't think it'll make
Apology
sense without
ads
me
from
introducing it.
PG&E.
Can we go back a little bit? Yeah.
Do as he says, okay?
So-
Alan?
So this is, if you live in San Francisco or anywhere in the Bay Area, which presumably most of you do, this is your utility. And this utility was convicted of a series of incredible criminal acts that blew up a town in the South Bay. Literally blew up a town and killed people. San Bruno, yeah. And the aftermath of this was a trial where, you know, for a variety of procedural reasons from good lawyering from San Francisco, there was only so much fines that could be levied on them and nobody could go to jail. But the judge did something really creative instead. The judge actually ordered PG&E to run ads, and you're gonna see a clip of one of the ads that are on TV right now. I saw one at a bar before I came here, where PG&E actually advertises its guilt and what it did in San Bruno. And
They still have to do it?
and they have to run these ads, millions of dollars of these
Scarlet
ads,
letter.
like during Warriors games and things like that. I just saw one during the, and you know, I couldn't describe what they did any better than what they did themselves in this ad.
Really?
So I'm gonna.
They did
I'm
a
gonna
good job?
Yeah. So
Okay.
just let this ad speak. for
Okay, here we go. PG&E guilt ad.
What is the alternative, I wonder?
Yeah.
I mean, it was either this or what?
On September 9th, 2010, PG&E learned a tragic lesson we can never forget.
Oopsie
You'll be
doodle.
seeing these videos for the next few months. Apology ads from PG&E. They identify the tragedy.
This gas pipeline ruptured in San Bruno. The explosion and fire killed 8 people.
Apologize.
We are deeply sorry.
And identify what the company is doing to prevent another explosion.
Actions can make PG&E safer.
But the videos aren't voluntary. Connie Jackson is the San Bruno city manager.
PG&E is required as a condition of their probation to place television advertising spots.
It was right here at the Northern District of California courthouse where a jury found PG&E guilty of 6 counts of violating federal law, including 1 count of obstructing the National Transportation Safety Board investigation into the blast. As part of its sentence, the judge ordered the company for 3 months to air television commercials, spending up to the cost of $3 million. Now, the order doesn't require PG&E to apologize in the videos, but they do.
We are deeply sorry.
So San Bruno has heard
a
a lot
human
of
voice?
apology
Yeah, it's
from
Florentina.
PG&E over these last
Okay,
6.5 years.
Good, James.
And I think I can say that this one actually does.
Okay.
All right.
So you, it's amazing, right? I think it's an amazing ad, and I actually still think it's something people don't really know about. And I think it's really important.
Outside
I
of the
think
Bay,
this
maybe.
is.
What
Has
is the
anyone seen these
alternative?
ads? Oh, there we go.
I think I might have. But yeah, my question.
Is PG&E still your energy company? Yeah.
What's the
There
alternative
is
to
no other.
PG&E?
There is
You
no
don't really have
Yeah.
it. You don't.
And I was wondering, what was the alternative to not running these ads?
I don't know.
They chose this.
You know,
instead.
I've never heard of anything like this. I litigated for 10 years, and I've never heard of a judge coming up with anything like this. So normally, what
So
you would
they
do is
wouldn't go
just
to
give.
jail?
You would give. You can't really send a corporation to jail. That's kind of a
Well,
weird.
they're people,
criminal
right?
law. Yeah, I mean, you can if you
What if-
convict officers. You
What
can,
if
but-
instead of like they have this video where they say they're sorry, what if it was just like a short commercial of like the CEO naked for like 30 seconds?
like
on your
fucking a
TV?
pig in that Black Mirror.
I
Just like
think I want to see early naked, but yeah.
This now makes Ruben Studdard's "I'm Sorry for 2004" the second worst apology song / video ever. This one was the worst.
and it's only $3 million, which is a fucking penny to them anyway.
I'm sorry for
This is definitely really creative work in litigation, legislation. I totally agree. But something. So that it happened in 2010 in September, and then it killed 8 people. And then, so the idea is that the pipeline leaked gas.
Yeah,
and then somehow.
Well, leaked gas, but it wasn't just negligence. It leaked gas. PG&E engineers knew about it, and they deliberately decided not to fix it, and actually took
cost a lot of
and
money to
actually
fix
took
it.
ratepayer money that they claimed were using to upgrade.
Wait, why didn't they
And-
say
yeah.
that in the video?
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, could you find
'Cause
out
that
why they
is
came back to
what
it?
is the actual
Yeah,
crime,
good,
right?
good question. I guess the script was probably never approved by the judge, but I think it's pretty damning as it is.
It is. It's good.
And you know, here's what's important about this: is it's not just meant to be like, here's the bad guys, and you should know what they're about. Although I do mean that too. But what you may have seen instead of this ad is much more money that's being spent on ads where PG&E is using families with solar panels and saying that they are so pro clean energy and they are, you know, the best company in the world and they have all these beautiful diverse faces and these great families and they're and they're actually spending tens of millions of dollars on those ads. And to your question, what's the competition? You don't have competition when you're forced to buy power from a regulated monopoly. And so when you see those ads that talk about how much they love solar while they're trying to kill solar secretly behind the scenes, what you should be saying is like, why, if you're a monopoly, are you running an ad in the first place? You don't have any competition, right? And the answer is because of stuff like this, they don't want people to know what they're really about because, you know, at the end of the day, the state government could break them up into a much smaller utility, and it's, you know, that's the ultimate consequence. So they're engaged in this massive, what we call greenwashing campaign to make sure you don't see ads like this, and instead you do see ads about how much they love solar while they try to kill it behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's a lot of greenwashing that happens. Do you have other examples of that, just quick?
Sure.
For our enlightenment.
You know, Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, is the best example I could think of. Warren Buffett goes out and does all these interviews about how he's like this, you know, funny old uncle who like knows how to make money, and he's like he loves Hillary Clinton. He loves Hillary Clinton, and blah blah blah.
He's my type.
And his utilities own more fossil fuels than anybody in the country, and fight tooth and nails in the trenches against clean energy every day.
Okay, great example.
All right.
So now we know more. Now we're more aware.
And the more you know.
That documentary was awesome.
The more you
All
know.
right,
I love that
last
smooth
question. All right.
So last question. I think if you guys have been paying attention, you've got these answers mostly. Name 2 of the 4 richest Americans. We will accept any 2 of the 4 richest Americans who are also involved in the solar wars, could be fighting on either side of the solar wars. I think we've mentioned 3 of the names.
And see if you can turn into a Star Wars analogy. Continuing that, if there's some way.
Florentina, anybody in mind?
Elon Musk all the way.
Bill Gates.
Elon's one. That's a good answer.
All right, audience, what do you guys think?
All right, what do you guys think? Hold on. Somebody that hasn't answered
Koch
yet.
brothers, go.
Warren Buffett, duh, you just named him.
Okay.
So you
Well, thanks
name
for
2.
paying attention.
2.
But, yeah.
You didn't have to have
2.
the duh, bitch.
One more.
But you need 2, yeah.
And his wife.
What's that?
Gates?
No, not Gates.
You want to take another guess?
Nah, man, I'm good.
He's like a two-guest guy, man.
Where did the
He's a
attitude
two-guest
go?
guy.
Duh, you just named
Koch
Warren
brothers,
Buffett. Okay, we get it. All right,
What is it?
Warren Buffett.
And the Koch brothers?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's a Koch brothers
How
will give
about
you two more.
Yeah, half.
Koch
Yeah, half
brothers.
and half.
That's
Half,
two
all right.
people.
Come down, both of you guys. Come on down. Come on down.
All right, let's get half a price here and half a price here. Come on.
You have to
Come
share
on
the
up.
shirt.
You gotta share.
Share.
Like siblings in trouble, you have to share the shirt.
Share the shirt. You both get your own Eureka shirt.
Ah,
There you go. You're welcome. You're right. You got it, buddy.
Bill Clinton.
Oh, that's right. You could wear that and the Bill Clinton
So,
mask.
so the four Charles and David Koch understand that between the Kochs, it's really deceiving because they control the biggest private fortune together in the country. So I think of them as only one
in
brain.
the hell
Yeah.
are
Look
we
at-
watching?
And there's Elon Musk who owns Tesla, Solar City, and SpaceX. And
Justin,
and
which
some others.
one is the top? Which one's the bottom? Do you know?
They're both bottoms to me.
They're both bottoms.
Yeah.
Did they have to make
That
it
doesn't
so
make a top.
realistic?
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
See his arthritis.
That's an actual cover from Bloomberg Businessweek.
You see that? Does everyone see that?
It looks pretty fucking real too. I'm getting turned on by like
Yeah.
Elon Musk.
That was a
hairy
great photo.
chest.
Ann
Yeah.
Leibovitz actually shot that. It was an amazing
Send
photo
this-
shoot. It was
Send
really
this over to me.
Tag me.
Yeah, I want to touch myself to it tonight.
So the story has everything, right? I mean, it's got four of the 5 richest or 4 of the 10 richest Americans, and some really interesting personalities, and some real consequences on either side. It's the biggest issue of our time by any measure.
Ironically,
Yeah,
only
gifts are
one
the
of
biggest issues.
only one of these 4 is actually producing solar panels in the solar wars.
Yeah.
The guy getting choked out. Just so you know.
He's enjoying it.
Yeah. This is like the audience. Now, have you've interacted with some of these
all of them.
people? All of them.
In that capacity?
Oh my
No.
God. Yeah.
Not that I remember.
Where's that edible oil again? I think we'll bring it down.
Yeah.
Brian,
Show
we
us
have a
in
home
a-
video of Brian just
Oh my God.
Show
going
us
to
your
the
favorite
mat.
move that you used. On
How
that.
much of your soul was sucked out when you met the Koch brothers?
So then, wait, what's the status of this
I
war?
wonder.
Obviously, here it looks like
Looks
Elon
like
Musk
3
is gonna
against
is
1.
not gonna survive.
It's not going well right now. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, the largest market in the country is California. We got the new data 3 days ago. It shrunk by 30% in the last quarter.
For solar.
In terms of how much it was growing, it grew by 30%.
No,
less than
actually,
normal?
yeah. Well, right. The growth rate shrunk by 30%, and so we've seen some states like Arizona and Nevada go down to essentially zero. The industry is in tough shape right now. It's not a good time in state capitals or Washington. One of the things that has been lost in the story about Trump land is Republicans actually control more state legislative bodies now than they ever have in American history. It wasn't just Washington that it was a wipeout. And so, we had states that were sort of on the edge where we would have Democrats be able to stop bad things, and those seats were just wiped out. It was an electoral bloodbath up and down the ballot. And so, yeah, things aren't going well.
Nevada is one of the ones that you mentioned, and that's where Buffett owns a lot of stake.
Yeah, he owns the utility in Nevada.
He owns the utility there, and Elon's, that's the struggle right now, is that they want to get solar panels up in the homes, and just a big article on, what was it?
Yeah, well,
Forbes?
Nevada became kind of the rupture point on this almost 2 years ago now, and the conclusion was Buffett's utility, which is called NV Energy, shut down the solar market. 6,000 solar workers lost their jobs. And it was really the first state in the country to shut down an active renewable market. And Buffett, I think, has largely emerged unscathed from it. I think his reputation is still basically intact. People don't think of him as a fossil fuel titan, but he very much
But he
is.
looks like a fossil fuel.
He looks
Yeah,
like he's the
he looks like he's
UFC
got-
heavyweight.
It's crazy how
He looks like he
money,
breathes fossil fuel.
It's crazy how money and incumbency gets in the way of future progress of civilization. That's something that happens across many industries, but especially this energy industry, especially fossil fuels.
It's outside of Reno.
That's
Nevada.
is that the second one, right? Or the one in Fremont is
The
not
Tesla?
a gigafactory.
I knew
yeah.
I shouldn't have
Big
trusted a guy who eats McDonald's every day for breakfast.
Oh, is that what he does?
I thought it was endearing. It was so cute. Did
Yeah,
you
this
see the
is weird.
documentary?
That
It
should
was
be
really
on.
awesome.
And I choose not to. I guess.
Well, so okay, so what is your prognosis then? Well, what do you think is going to happen in the future?
Yeah, that was one of the questions. Is that what are you thinking in the next 5 years? And let's end on the positive note.
Yes. When do you predict the apocalypse?
When are we gonna die?
5-year, 20-year, 100. Like, how do we get to a place of a future of energy sustainability? Yeah.
Okay, so everybody always gets this question in the world I live in. You go to clean tech conferences, and then everybody wants to sugarcoat things and say, if we just do X, it's going to be fine. And
Just do ecstasy.
Yeah, like it's like.
That's the solution.
Yes.
It's
like,
Party.
We're gonna end on that, ladies and gentlemen. No kidding.
You've been great. Bye.
Yeah.
And it's
Go on,
you be you, and we'll win. And I'm going to give you a slightly different answer, which is not meant to be cynical. I try to capture what we've seen through this history. We're in a very volatile period of politics. Politics is just like unthinkably changing rapidly right now. Few people predicted Trump, despite what people say afterwards. Few people predicted that the Republicans would control the number of legislatures that they change. The news in Washington has never moved faster, and there will come another moment, and it might not take as long as we think. Nancy Pelosi may well be speaker again, not that long from now. That the Democrats have now an enormous opportunity because of Republican self-inflicted wounds. And turnout across the country will be hugely depressed on the Republican side. And if we can get our voters out, a lot can change in the next cycle. And so what I will tell you is, like, a year and a half from now, we have a chance to turn the tide on all this. And it is like, hang on until then, and try to prevent the worst things from happening, and fight in the trenches, primarily at the state and local level when you can. But what I don't want to tell you is that, like, somehow we can just be smarter over the next 18 months and get back control of bodies that we are simply totally outside of our control right now. We have to win elections. Elections have consequences, and we're bearing the fruit of those consequences right now.
And maybe in the 18 months we can work on the private industry and ideas there.
Definitely.
Sure.
Progress.
Sure, yeah.
That's great.
For sure, yeah.
So that was our final question. We're running out of time. If there's any final questions from the audience before we end the show, any questions for Bryan here?
All right, we have a question up front.
So is this war purely ideological, or is it actually just cheaper to make oil, and we're not there yet in terms of having very cheap solar energy? What is the thing? Is that, or is it just purely ideological?
I don't think there's anything ideological in politics. I don't want to sound too cynical, but nobody actually believes on
anything.
On that stuff. It's just about what's good business for them, and it's not that fossil fuels are cheaper. We talked about nuclear, for instance, which is not technically fossil, but it is a finite resource because you need uranium. But nuclear is not competitive economically by any stretch of the imagination.
That
right?
uranium is needed for fission. You can fuse with hydrogen isotopes.
Okay. Well, anyway.
I was just
my point is. I was making a point. Yeah, but
Thank you,
my point is my point is just. Nuclear is not economic by any rational argument you can make. The government has to insure every nuclear power plant. You can't get private insurance on it. It's hugely subsidized. Why do people fight for nuclear? Because they own nuclear power plants. My old employer, Exelon, owned more nuclear power plants than any company in the country. They didn't wake up in the morning and go, I really believe in nuclear. They believed in protecting the stack, as they called it. And it always just comes down to where your fleet is, as they say.
And they're used for so many other things, like the plastics industry and textiles. So a lot of other things are what oil gets refined into. So it is kind of like that right now. It used to cost a lot more to make a solar panel. Now it costs a lot less. But that's kind of what we do with technology. As we progress, we figure out how to make things cheaper.
All right, final question. One last question for the night. Anybody?
1 second.
Bill Clinton's got a question.
Bill Clinton?
No, you have to do it with the mask, please.
Yes, do it.
Oh, he has the mask.
Aw.
That's
Sweet.
Have you encountered any more progressive utility company in any other state that's doing things that, if we could influence PG&E to do things differently than what they do,
Sort of, and I'll explain what I mean. The Northeast is a very different energy market structure than what we have in California. You asked before what your choice is from PG&E, and you don't really have one. But in the Northeast, you can choose from dozens of different power providers, and the utility still maintains the distribution and the transmission system, the wires that deliver the power, but there's a competitive market where people compete to provide you electricity, and they often offer clean energy, which you can buy, or dirty energy, you can do whatever combination you want. And it's not so much that the utilities are more enlightened there, it's just that there's so many more of them that not any one of them has a dominant influence on the regulators in the state. Because the biggest problem in politics is when you have concentrated power. When you have just one monopoly in a state and the regulators are put in office by that one monopoly, then obviously the deck is stacked against you. But if you've got, what happens in New York, I advocate a lot in New York, and the utility will go and say something to the regulator, and the regulator will say, that's interesting, and what do the 39 other players in this market think? And it just kind of diffuses political power. So, to me, one of the long-term answers to this is just break them up. You need deregulation in the way that we have in the Northeast, and that just waters down the political power that any one player can have.
Just break that shit up.
1 second.
Why is there not a trust bust for
PG&E?
PG&E, yeah, I don't understand.
Break it up so it's P, it's G, and it's E.
Great question.
That'd be nice.
And don't forget the and.
Great question.
Yeah,
and when
ampersand.
you think about Republican ideology, energy is one of the last things that's a government-granted monopoly in our country, and it's hugely hypocritical for the Trump administration to say, "Oh, we're for deregulation, but we're going to let the utilities go on as they exist." Because I would just ask you, what else is there to deregulate in this country? We deregulated basically everything else, and the utilities are the last people who have government protecting them from competition. And so,
I want my Pacific separate from my gas.
Comcast.
It's gross.
Internet's another horrible one, like Comcast and monopolizing. There are places like South Korea that really understand that the people's access to the internet is incredibly important for enlightenment, and it's really cheap and it's fast versus the way that it's here. So.
And that should be a pretty conservative argument, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, conservative argument. All right. Well, hey,
Awesome.
guys, give it up for Bryan Miller,
Thank
huh?
you, Bryan.
Bryan Miller.
Didn't we? That was a very edifying experience. Give it up for Justin and Florentina, everybody.
Great job.
And for yourselves for coming out.
Thank you
For
so
yourselves
much.
for being
Thank
here
you.
tonight.
Strong